Chapter 1 of Tales from Silver Lands. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Lynette Calkins. Tales from Silver Lands by Charles Finger. A Tale of Three Tales. Down in Honduras there is a town called Pueblo de Comelicon, which is not much of a town after all. There is only one street in it, and the houses are like big beehives that have been squared up, and the roofs are of straw. There is no sidewalk nor roadway, and the houses are unfenced, so that you step from the room into the sandy street, and because of the heat, when you are inside you wish that you were out, and when you are outside you wish that you were in. So the children of the place spend much time down at the little river. At least they did when I was there. I rode there on a donkey, and, the day being hot, let the animal graze, or sleep, or think, or dream, or work out problems, or whatever it is that a donkey does with his spare time, and I watched the children in the water. There was one, a little baby just able to toddle around, who crawled down to the water's edge, rolled in, and swam about like a little dog, much as the babies of Tierra del Fuego will swim in the icy waters of the far south. He came out on my side of the water, as lively as a grig, smiling every bit as friendly as any other little chap of his age, white, brown, or yellow. I stayed there that night, because the day did not get cool, and in the evening the people sat outside of their houses and played the guitar and sang. Now, I had with me a little musical instrument like a tiny organ, which I bought in France, and it was so compact and handy that I could carry it everywhere as easily as I could a blanket. In fact, I used to ride with it behind my saddle, wrapped in my bedding. Well, as the people seemed to like their music, I brought out mine, so we had a very jolly concert, in spite of my poor voice, which they politely pretended not to notice. Then later, from curiosity, the children came about me, and to amuse them as well as myself, having done so badly at the singing, I did a few tricks with wads of rolled paper and a couple of tin cups. And the little boy who had swum across the pond laughed as loudly as anyone there. That pleased his father mightily, so much indeed that he brought me a cup of goat's milk and some cassava bread, and told me that I was a fine fellow. To please me further, he sang a very, very long song. It was all about the parrot and the wonderful things it did. A parrot that had lived long among people and learned their songs, and when the bird flew back to the forest, it still sang, and so well that all the other parrots in the forest learned to sing the song from beginning to end. But what was curious was that at the end of every other verse there was this line, "When the rat had a tail like a horse." So when he had done, I asked him about that, for all the rats I had seen had tails which were far from beautiful, according to my notion. The man listened gravely, then said, "But certainly, once the rat had a tail like a horse." "When was that?" I asked. "When the rabbit had a tail like a cat," he said. "But I am still puzzled," I told him. "Was it long ago?" "It was when the deer's tail was plumed like the tail of a dog," he told me. As we talked, a kind of polite silence was upon all the people gathered about us. Then a very, very old woman, who was smoking a cigar, nodded her head and said, "But Tio Ravenna is right. It was in the days of Hunbats, who lived on beetles and spiders, and I heard it from my mother's mother, and she from the mother of her mother." Then the old woman went on smoking with her eyes closed, and all who were there nodded at one another, thinking, I suppose, that the old grandmother would presently tell the story. But of course they who knew her well were wiser than to ask her to tell the tale of three tales, so everyone waited. Presently a little girl gave the old grandmother a piece of sugar, and asked, Was it 2 brothers or 3 who had to clear the great forest? I am not sure." At that the little old lady's eyes were bright, and she threw away her cigar and said, "2 brothers. That I have told you before." After a little sigh, which was only pretending that she was weary of telling the tale, she said, "You know that I have told it to you before, and it is wrong that I should have to tell it so often. But you see this." So saying, she took from her bosom, where she had it fastened to a silk thread, a little piece of jade, and let us see it. It was broken from a larger piece, but we could make out on it a carving which I saw to be a deer with a tail like a sheep's dog. We passed it about, and everyone looked at it carefully, although certainly all of them must have seen it time and time again, and when it came to the old grandmother again, she replaced it, and told us the tale of 3 tails, just as I have written it here. Once, long ago, the rat had a beautiful tail like a horse, with long sweeping hairs, though it was before my time of life. It was in the days of old Hunbats, and he was a wizard who lived in the dark of the great forest that used to be on the other side of the big river. In those days things were not as now, and animals were different, some larger, some smaller. The deer, as you have seen on the stone I showed you, had a tail like a dog, and the rabbit's tail was long and furry like the tail of a cat. Now in that land there was a hunter with whom neither lasso nor arrow ever failed, and he had 2 sons, beautiful to look at and brave of heart, stout and quick of foot. Not only did the brothers work better than any men had ever worked, but they could play ball and sing, throwing the ball higher than birds could fly, and singing in a way that brought the wild things to hear them. Nor was there living creature able to run as swiftly as the 2 brothers. The birds alone could outrace them. The brothers being grown, their father thought that it was time for them to make a home for themselves, so chose a place on the farther side of the forest, and told them to clear it, which, he said, could be done in 7 days. It was no little forest, you must remember, but a vast place, where sunlight never pierced, and the roots of trees were like great ropes, a jungle that stretched for miles and miles, and the tangle in it was so thick that a monkey could barely get through without squeezing. Deep in the forest there was a blackness like the blackness of night. The trunks of the trees were so large that 3 men holding hands could not circle them, and where there were no trees there were vines and snake-like lianas and thorn bushes and flowers so great that a man could lie down to sleep in the shade of them. The first day the brothers took a great space, piling the trees at one corner, clearing the tangle and leaving all as smooth as the water of a lake. They sang as they worked, and they sang as they rested in the heat of the day, and the organ bird and the flute bird answered them from the gold-green shade. So pleasant was their music that the old iguana, though he was as big as a man, came from his resting place in the trees to listen. Seeing how things were going, old Hunbats in the dark of the forest grew very angry, fearing that his hiding place would soon dwindle and vanish. So he went to the great grey owl, his friend, and they talked the matter over between them. The owl told Hunbats that he must set the father's heart against the brothers, telling him that the boys were lazy, and instead of working, spent their time in playing with the ball and in singing. "Go," said the owl, "to their father, and when he asks how the lads fare with their work, say to him, 'They sing and they play for half of the day.' It may fall out that he will grow angry and cut off their heads, and thus the forest will be safe for us." That seemed to the wizard to be good advice, and before the close of the day's work, old Hunbats, who could fly by flapping his hands in a certain way like a swimmer, cast himself into the air and flew with great swiftness to the place where the father lived. but he took care to dress himself like a woodman. "Well met," said the father, seeing Hunbats, but thinking him no wizard, of course. "From where do you come?" "From the other side of the forest," was the reply. "Then perchance you saw my 2 sons who are clearing the forest," said the father. "I did," said Hunbats. "And how are the boys doing?" asked the father. At that Hunbats shook his head sadly, and answered as the old owl had told him, "They sing and they play for half of the day." That, you know, was quite untrue, for while they sang there was no stopping of work, and as for the play, it is true that they threw the ball from one to the other, but so clever were they that one would throw the ball so high that it would take hours and hours before it came down again, and of course while it was in the air the brothers went on working. "I would cut off their heads to teach them a lesson," said Hunbats, "if they were sons of mine." Then he turned on his heel and went away, not flying until he was out of the father's sight, for he did not wish any man to know that he was a wizard. To be sure, the good man was grieved, and his face clouded when he heard the tale of Hunbats, but he said nothing, and a short time after the brothers came home. He was much surprised when, asking the lads how much work they had done that day, they told him that they had cleared off the space of forest he had bidden them to. After much thought, he told them that the next day they would have to do twice as much as before. The brothers thought the new task hard, but they went to work with a good will, and on the second day the trees fell like corn before a man with a machete, and before night they had finished that which they had been given to do. Again old Hunbats flew through the air to the father, and tried to set him against the boys. And again that night, when the boys were home, their task was set for the next day twice as much as the day before. It was the same the third day and the fourth, until at last the boys came to a point where by the mightiest working they could not move a stick or a blade of grass more. And yet, because of old Hunbats, the father set them a task still greater. On the 5th day things looked very hopeless for the boys, and their hearts were sad as they looked at the forest and saw the task that their father had set them to do. They went to work, feeling for the first time it would be impossible for the sun to go down on their finished task, and the heart of old Hunbats was glad. But the birds in the forest were silent that morning, for they too knew that there were sad hearts in the brothers. Even the grasshoppers and the mosquitoes and the bees were still, and as for the boys, not a note of joy could they raise. Then to them came the iguana, wise old lizard who knew everything that went on in the forest, and as soon as he heard what the brothers had to say, he smiled and called on them to listen, after making sure that there was no living creature to hear except the birds, for of them he had no fear, knowing that the birds tell no secrets. "Be cheerful," said the iguana, "and I will tell you a charm. It is this: mark about the handles of your working tools rings of black, white, red, and green, and before you start to work, sing, 'I must do what I can is the thought of a man.' And if your hearts are brave, you will see what happens." Having said this and smiled on the brothers, the old iguana climbed into a tree and stretched himself along the branch of it where he could best see, and the birds gathered in a great circle, a matchless melody going up to the sky. So the brothers took their axes, their spades, their hoes, and their machetes, and painted about the handles of them rings of black and of white and of red and of green, and their voices rang sweet and clear as they sang, as the iguana had told them, "I must do what I can is the thought of a man." No sooner had the last words passed than the whole company of birds broke out into a chorus, singing, chattering, chirping, whistling, screaming, each according to its manner, and, without hands touching them, axes went to work cutting down trees, Machetes chopped at lianas and vines, spades cleared and dug, and trees, bushes, and weeds piled themselves in great heaps at the edge of the clearing, so that in less than an hour the whole task was done. Then it was that all the things in the forest were glad, and the good iguana smiled broadly. The very monkeys joined in, and, catching the ball which the brothers threw, tossed it from tree to tree until it passed through the whole jungle and back again. But old Hunbats was angry beyond measure, so angry that he whirled about on his heels 300 times, turning so rapidly that he looked like a storm cloud, and his long whiskers were tangled about him like a mantle. But the faster he whirled, the more his anger boiled, and flapping his hands, he shot into the air, going so swiftly that his very clothes were scorched. "How are the boys?" asked the father when Hunbats stood before him. For answer, Hunbats screamed, "Your boys are idle fellows! They sing and they play for half of the day. Had I such sons, I would cut their heads off to teach them a lesson." Said the father, "Tomorrow I shall go to the forest, and if you have not spoken truth, then this arrow, which has never yet missed a mark, shall find one in your heart. But if it is as you say, then my sons shall feel my anger." Old Hunbats did not like that at all, for well he knew that the hunter's arrows were never wasted. So back he flew to the owl, and the two of them whispered together. That night there was a great gathering of the animals, of the hare, the deer, the rat, the jaguar, the puma, the opossum, and many others. The rat, the deer, and the rabbit led them, and in a wonderfully short time, not only were all things restored and the work of the day undone, but the trees and the bushes and the vines and the lianas that had been moved on the other days were put back in their old places, growing and blooming, so that all was as though the brothers had never been at the forest at all. Sad was the hour the next morning, when the hunter came with his two sons, and saw the forest as though hand had never touched it. The brothers could not believe their eyes. Grinning from the thick of a rubber tree was the face of Hunbats, and on his shoulder was the owl. For a moment the father thought to cut off the heads of the lads, to teach them a lesson, but on second thought he told them that he would give them another chance. "What should have been done is not done," he said. "I will grant you a day and a night to clear all the forest as you told me it was cleared. Tomorrow morning I will come again, and see whether all is well done." At that he left them and went his way. No sooner had he gone than the two brothers went to see the iguana, who told them of the witchery of the owl and Hunbats, and bade them to act as before. So they made the ring about the handles of their working tools once more, and sang, "I must do what I can, is the thought of a man." And as on the day before, axes, machetes, and spades went to work, and in a short time all was clear again. Then the iguana told the brothers of the evil that Hunbats had done, and bade them set traps and keep watch that night. So 3 traps were made and set, and when night fell, from all parts of the forest there came animals, led by the rat, the deer, and the rabbit, and old Hunbats and the owl watched from the dark caves of the leaves. No sooner had the first 3 animals stepped into the clearing than they were caught fast in the traps, whereupon the rest of the animals turned and fled. Then the brothers rushed to the traps. The rabbit gave a great leap when he felt the jaws close upon his beautiful cat-like tail, but it was chopped off close to the body. The deer, with his tail like a plume, fared no better. So both deer and rabbit fled to the woods ashamed, and as you see for yourself, have had no tails ever since. As for the rat, he was far too wise to jump as the rabbit and deer had done, but seeing the brothers coming, he pulled and pulled and pulled, so that all the beautiful hair was stripped, leaving him with but a bare and ugly thing of a tail, as you see today. The next morning, when the hunter-father came, there was the forest cleared, and all in good order, as the boys had said. So he sought out old Hunbats, who flapped his hands and flew for very fear. But so fast he went that his clothes were burnt off, and his skin was baked into a hard crust by the great heat, and he fell to the earth, and so became what we call an armadillo. As for the two brothers, they lived very happily for many, many years, and things went well with them, and the land they lived in was a land of good harvest and fruit trees. So now you know the tale of 3 tales, and if you do not believe it, look at the rat and the deer and the rabbit and the armadillo and see for yourself. End of A Tale of 3 Tales.